Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation, Peripheral Privilege, Macau Students' Identity and the Politics of Hybridity in Mainland Chinese Universities. So here is the table of the contents I will introduce to you. So we have seen traditional patterns of international student mobility from developing countries to developed countries in the past decades. However, recently more international students, particularly from global south, choose China as their preferred destination. So among this international cohort in China, students from Hong Kong and Macau, the special administrative regions, aka SAR, occupy a relatively large proportion. So as the statistic shows, many SAR students now choose mainland Chinese university for their tertiary education. So their migration to mainland China constitutes a novel phenomenon called intra-country cross-border mobility. So the naming of this type of mobility is that Macau and Hong Kong are under one country and two systems framework. So this means that Macau and Hong Kong students are neither insider, as Macau and Hong Kong they exercise capitalist system. They are neither outsider because Macau and Hong Kong are geographically and politically part of China. So increasing research have particularly focused on Hong Kong students' experiences in mainland China, leaving a critical gap where research on Macau students' adaptation experience remains limited. So to address this gap, I propose two research questions. So what are the experiences of Macau students during their study in the mainland Chinese universities? How do these students reconstruct their identities within the multiple third spaces of their intra-country cross-border mobility? So this study follows two theoretical frameworks, third space and world system theory. So third space derives from the notion of in-between spaces in post-colonial research to analyze the power relations brought by imperialism in the Third World and the global decolonization. Third space, in other words, is an in-between spaces to compromise static colonizing and colonized boundary. However, this framework is criticized because of its ignorance of material reality. So some scholars propose to enrich third space by adopting a world systems lens. So it takes us to the next framework. So the world systems is a theory that illustrates the macro level impacts of world history and global development on the power relations among different nations. So generally, it divides countries around the globe into three types of regions. Core regions like the United States are economic developed, technologically advanced, and politically dominant. Semi-peripheral regions have intermediate development level. They act as buffer between core and peripheral, and they have mixed economic characteristics. So peripheral regions are economically dependent, less developed in many aspects, and they are exploited by core regions. So this framework is still criticized because it holds a relatively static and deterministic view on the relationships between these regions. So in the current study, we position mainland China as an upper semi-core region and Macau as a semi-peripheral region. So Macau semi-periphery is intrinsically linked to its past colonial history. So generally, Macau can be seen as a third space situated between the West and East. It has a 442-year colonial history under Western influence, but particularly under Portuguese influence. So it was returned to mainland China in 1999. So this unique colonial trajectory results in a high degree of Macau's high degree of cultural hybridity and its constant identity shift. First, Macau was a periphery inside the Portuguese core because of the Portugal dominant position in the oceanic trade in the 16th century. Then it became a periphery outside the British core when Portugal was replaced by British global colonial network. After handover, Macau re-entered the capitalist core by its casino industries because Macau is allowed to exercise its capitalist under one country systems, two systems framework. So synthesized from the literature, it's reasonable to argue that Macau students may have hybrid identity, and their hybrid identity may be contested when they migrate to mainland China, where they encounter different socio-cultural structures. So in terms of research design, through snowball sampling, 20 Macau students voluntarily joined our study. 10 of them are undergraduates, 10 of them are graduates, and they major in media, psychology, journalism, etc. So upon their consent, we conducted semi-structured interviews followed by inductive and deductive semantic analysis on their interview data. So we primarily ask questions about why they choose to study in mainland Chinese universities, their experiences, and how they adapt to living in mainland China by negotiating their identities. So here's the finding. So we primarily find that our participants simultaneously encounter marginalization and privilege in the mainland. So to navigate between these two extremes, they negotiate their identities under meritocratic pressure. And they also engage in online South diaspora group and rethink their mobility. So here I provide the key takeaway of our findings. So our findings reveal that students occupy complex third spaces such as cultural, institutional, and social third spaces. They negotiate their identities between the perceived core and the peripheral of the world system. So they simultaneously perceive their own identity as being part of the core due to their post-colonial status. So I will unpack this finding. So our participants, initially our participants actively seek cultural belonging when they later felt culturally disadvantaged in the mainland. So their sense of fragmented identity is the result of the uneven position of mainland and China. So specifically, Macau is geographically peripheralized in the Chinese territory, but it's still it is still governed under one country, two systems framework. So for many of our participants, China functions as a cultural third space where they negotiate between the citizen and the stranger. So I provide some quotes from our participants. For Lily, she show her strong desire to study in mainland China because not only she can learn about motherland, but also the world, since Macau is a really small place. But for some participants like Rollins, after they go into the mainland, they found themselves elephant in the room because their teachers and peers will say, well, are you from Hong Kong? I'm from Taiwan, but no one has thought of Macau as if the place did not exist in their world. So to navigate between privilege and marginalization, our participants decided to downplay their privileges for cultural and social expectations of mainland universities. So for example, they may introduce Macau as a province to their mainland peers, just as these peers do to their counterparts. And they also try to work hard like their mainland peers. So their practices reflect Baba's notion of mimicry. In our Macau participants' case, they imitate mainland meritocraticness against Macau identity as exotic. So in doing so, they began to rethink their identity by partially engaging and partially withdrawing from the meritocratic game. So in other words, they are both insider and outsider. So they develop a sense of in-betweenness in mainland campus as an institutional third space. In other words, their privilege is in disguise to resist mainland meritocratic governance, which is a form of mental colonization. So as Tina highlights her nervousness because of her competitive mainland peers, but she did not recognize the necessity to following what they are doing, because essentially she's on a different track. And Ruby furthered her points by precisely pointing out different perceptions of education in Macau and the mainland. And similar to Lily, she found that there's no need to follow their mainland peers because luckily she is an outsider. So from the previous 2 points, we found that Macau students' hybrid identity as their sense of in-betweenness. They are outsiders within Chinese universities and insiders without the necessity to conform the meritocratic pressure. So this point is their sense of hybrid identity is further seen in pursuing belonging in digital space, which is social third space in our current studies. So their practice reflects the global local practice reflects Baba's notion of vernacular cosmopolitanism. It means that our participants creating new forms of belonging between multiple worlds by their everyday practices. So for example, some of our participants join our online diaspora group. This is a shelter for them to reimagine upward and downward social mobility within mainland China. So I provide some quotes here. So despite William's intentional efforts to blending, he still found there are many barriers across him and between him and his mainland peers. So some of our some participants like Johnny decided to join online group where they can share useful information to prepare for postgraduate entrance exam in the mainland China, which is much easier compared to the version for mainland test takers. So but for participants like Zoe, she decided to go back to Macau as she found that the difficulty of obtaining a work permit in the mainland, despite Shanghai is big and cosmopolitan. So let's move on to the discussion. So through our participants' narratives, we unpack their identity negotiations through cultural, institutional, and social third spaces. Their hybridity is intrinsically linked to their simultaneous sense of marginalization, privilege, their practice of vernacular cosmopolitanism, and their practice of mimicry and resistance. So integrating third space and word systems, we reveal Macau students' in-between status within word systems. In other words, for our participants, word system hierarchies are fluidly experienced, while their sense of in-betweenness actually serve for strategic survival rather than pure structural subversiveness, because we still see that many of our participants still rely on their privilege in order to reimagine their upward social mobility in the mainland. So their narratives not only echoes the previous critiques regarding third space and word systems, and but also our synergistic framework critiques the third space idealized conceptualization and word systems fixed space conceptualizations. So in a word, our study provides a comprehensive understanding of complex experiences, identity reformation of Macau students in mainland China by using third space and word system theory. So it also highlights the importance of considering the local, national, global structural implication in shaping borderland students' mobility experiences, we thus critique static spatial paradigms in post-colonial studies. So however, there are limitations. So limitation of the study include a small sample size and the absence of a longitudinal tracing. So the experiences of Macau students may not be representative of all cross-border and international students in mainland China. And here are the references, and thanks for listening. So any comments and questions?